Hi guys, I'm Sarah and I serve here at Victory in the church office. We're so glad that you tuned in to today's message, and I believe that something in this sermon is going to help encourage you and help you take the next step forward in your faith journey. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that way you never miss a video. Now let's hear from the sermon.
So now when we think about the Bible and we think about the best-selling books in the world, that probably on your own mind, given today, generation, culture, you don't necessarily see it at Barnes & Noble on the New York Times bestseller list. Who goes to Barnes & Noble, by the way, anymore? Okay, thank you. We've got two. All right, who knows what Barnes & Noble is? Okay, how many of you shop on Amazon? Okay, how many of you shop for books on Amazon? Okay, it's like I do. All right, there's a list there of top-selling books. You can go to Amazon, you go to Barnes & Noble, you go all these different places. Who remembers Borders? Okay, I remember Borders books. I'm just trying to think of all these places that have closed right now. Okay, but you think about books and you think about best-selling books. It's probably rare that you'll think about the Bible being the best-selling book, particularly for those of you who I know are concerned, right? We're concerned about culture in the country and we're worried about what's happening to Christian place and culture, and you think, oh, it's not really probably selling that well. People don't know what it is. And comparison to other books which we hear about all the time. I just did a quick study during the week on the best-selling books, the best-selling series of all time. My guess is if you could think about what the best-selling book series of all time, what would you think? A series of books. Somebody said it. All right, Dory. Harry Potter. I kind of knew you'd get it. Harry Potter, which is obvious. That's the number one selling book series of all time. And when I say series, I mean all the books, because 7 books, including, if we're going to throw that out there, I mean, 7 books. There's 3 companion books like the Tales of the Beetle Bard and a couple others that are in there. You have 4 scripts. I didn't know about 3 of those. I know about 1. You got 4 scripts in there. So you have 14 different volumes. There's 600 total copies, 600 million combined copies of this whole series. 120 of those are just for the first book alone, The Sorcerer's Stone, which was released in 1997, and then 480 million up until this point of everything else. So 600 million copies of just that series. And then you shouldn't be surprised, it's mostly kids' series because the next of the series of books is Stein's, the horror series for the little kids. What is it? Who is it? Goosebumps. Yeah, the Goosebumps stories. That's like the next in line. But then if you look at singular works, you have the first one I found out is actually, of all books, Don Quixote. Interesting. How many of you read that in high school? Yeah. All right. So yeah. And then after that is the next selling book is Tale of Two Cities. I read that, and I remember reading that in high school. And I don't know how much these sales are bumped up by high school required reading. I don't know, but things happen. But this is over the period of time. Those are very old books, so they've been on the market for a while. But you don't have a lot of Don Quixotes flying off the shelf anymore, or Tale of Two Cities. You don't have that flying off the shelf, so they've kind of died down. And so you have books like Harry Potter, popular, people just blowing up. But then if you look at the Bible itself, and this is Bibles of all translations and kinds put together, have sold, and this is when we're talking about being mass-produced. Yes, they've been around for quite a while. The Bible's been around for a while, but we're talking about mass-produced like how we are now. We're like 1800s in comparison, like with Don Quixote or Tale of Two Cities. And it's been sold, a Guinness Book of World Records, 5 to 7 billion. Billion. Harry Potter was at 600 million. The Bible has been sold 5 to 7 billion copies. And then I think we'll go to the next slide, over 20 million are sold each year. Not when it was first released. This year, over 20 million have been sold. It tops the bestseller list every single year. Every single year, it tops the bestseller list. And I don't know why. I'm not going to argue conspiracy that's not on the New York Times. Maybe it's just give these guys a chance. I don't know. Maybe something like that. I don't know. But not only that, like Harry Potter, if you saw on the other slide, it's been translated into 80 different languages, which is pretty impressive. The Bible has been translated, the whole Bible, into 700 languages. And then partial pieces of the Bible. When I say partial, I mean like a single book of the Bible, like the book of John, for instance, or if you're going into discovering a new language group, you don't have a lot of times, it takes a long time to translate the whole thing into a language, so they'll start with like the book of John, or a smaller book to tell them the gospel of Jesus Christ. 3,500 languages worldwide. And I don't think we really realize that, because it never makes the news. You'll never, like I said, if you go look for New York Times bestsellers, it's not going to be on there. And it's a whole variety of the translations and different things are kind of all compiled together for that. But we have to think about it, well, okay, why? Why is it so popular? Why are people still looking for it? And it's really simple. It's so simple because human beings, as much as we always like to think we've evolved, haven't changed in terms of the basic questions for life. People who are looking for answers to who God is. If you go through AA, they always refer to the higher power. Well, what is that? Well, what is that? And the Bible comes out hand over fist again and again as the go-to place. And it stands above all other religious writings, so far above. And people have the same questions about who is God? What's my purpose in life? Why am I here? Why do I exist? In the spirit inside of me doesn't want to die, even though I know that this is going to die, but there's this something in me, as the Bible says, God's planted eternity in our hearts. Like I'm not, Adam and Eve weren't created to die. And so there's something inside of me that's, I want to live, and there's got to be something greater than just me and this and that. And I need that. And then it's a common question that we all have to answer. And then, like I said, all other religious books pale in comparison to even just the content, the literary style, the cohesiveness of the Bible that is taught in colleges and public universities as a piece of literature. It's not just here we're trying to tell you, convert you to Christianity. It's as a piece of literature. It's purely unique amongst all other works that we have. So then, given its purpose and power, though, it's natural for people to have doubts. Because if it's true, it's a whole lot. If it's true, if I'm revealed to God, if I'm revealed to Jesus, if that's true, it changes everything. So how do I know that it's true? Like Harry Potter's fun and interesting, but we all know it's not real. It's a great story. It's fun to read, and there's been book series over the years, and your popular books, you love them because they're fun, they're entertaining, they're informative if you like biographies and those things, but how do you trust it? It's natural for people to have doubts. And I want to know that this is true. And so people have this. It's natural. The New Testament itself, we know, was written a long time ago. The Hebrew Old Testament, a long time ago. And then people will say, well, how do we know that it hasn't changed over the years? How many of you ever asked that question before? How do we know that it hasn't changed? I've asked that question. Or you have the question of like, why are there so many translations? Why are there so many translations of the Bible? And it seems to be, one seems to be coming out every few years. Why are there so many? Why do they need to be there? So we have these kinds of questions. And the answer is that how do we know that it hasn't been changed? Just that question. The answer is science. And people think that science and religion don't go together. By the way, I hope you've dumped that idea. But there's a science called textual criticism, where people actually put science and put it under the microscope. And I said this last week, like Christianity, the Bible begs to be investigated. Begs to be investigated. Like, test me, try me. It's just like Jesus coming up to a disciple and says, see that I've got bones, test it out. Hold my hands, see that I've got bones and flesh, I'm breathing, give me that piece of fish to eat, I'm alive. Just like we talked about that last week, God was to be examined. And in textual criticism, and this is what historians have done in their science of textual criticism, they'll look at manuscripts, ancient manuscripts particularly, and they'll look at them like, how do we know that these things are true? And it's just basically the same questions like, well, okay, it works basically like this. The more manuscripts that you have, and the earlier that they are, like closest to the event that they're describing, and the more copies that you have, you can be confident about what the original said. Okay? And just to give some examples, put the thing up here. Now, you may or not have read any of these books, okay? Historical documents. I mean, some of you may have, depending on your field of study, if you went to college, you looked at those things, but you have been influenced by it all because it's all made its way into historical textbooks. It's all in the footnotes, like the information that we know about the ancient world. Like, how do we get that? And there's different books called like this, Herodotus, and it was written between 488 and 420 BC, so it's before Christ. AD, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, 900. So you're looking at a gap now of 1,300 years between the time the original would have been written, to the copies that we have, and we have 8 copies. And people, the historians, the people who have examined this, the scientific historians, look at this and says, this is reliable. Herodotus is a reliable account of history. And that's a pretty big gap. 1,300 years is pretty good, but are the people that we trust, the experts, find it reliable? You got Thucydides. It's about the same thing, exact same time, about the same time, written the same time, earliest copies, 1,300 years, 8 copies again, considered reliable. And then you get to Livy's Roman history, 59 AD to AD 17, right in there. Again, 900 AD, 900-year time lapse. We have 20 copies. Okay, that's solid, right? It's absolutely solid. Is it completely without error? Probably not, but it's solid. Caesar's Gallic War, you have time period right around, right before the turn of the millennia, 900 AD, 950 years, and then you've got 9 to 10 copies of it. Tacitus, 800, 1100-year, 1,000-year gap. Now you've got 20 copies of it. And then you get to the New Testament. Look at those numbers. In terms of historical writings of the ancient world, here we have it being written between 40 and 100 AD. And just think through it. Can you put it back? Thank you. It was 40 to 100 AD. And this is where you've got the guys are now telling the story of Jesus, right? Because this is what they're doing. They're not thinking through, we got to write it down. They're telling the story. And then somebody says, hey, you're going to write that down? Paul's writing letters. They're actually dated before the Gospels, because he's writing letters to all the churches, and now they've got to come up with, we need to write all these things down. And so he started doing that. So between 40 and 100 AD, we have The first earliest copies are 130 AD. 30-year gap, full manuscripts at 350, 310-year gap, and you've got how many Greek copies? 5,000 Greek copies, 10,000 Latin, 9,300 copies in others, languages and other places. It's totally unique amongst ancient prose writings in terms of its reliability, that we know its reliability and that it hasn't been changed. It says what it says. It's over and over and over and over again. And one of the greatest, considered one of the greatest textual critics ever to live, F.J.A. Hort, he wrote this. He said, "In the variety and fullness of this evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone amongst ancient prose writings, and no secular historian disagrees with that." So what you have in front of you, in terms of what you have when you open your Bible, you can trust it. You can trust it. Then you think, though, okay, well, that's the New Testament. What about the Old Testament? Now, the key we know in the New Testament, because it tells us about Jesus who holds it all together. But then, what about the Old Testament? Well, the Hebrew version that we have, or it's called the Masoretic text, has been around since about, I want to say, only the 9th century AD. Only. Okay? You do the math, and that's a long time. It's a long time. 9th century AD. And since it's been copied by hand for much of that time, scrolls, and it's just copied and copied and copied and copied and copied. How do we know people didn't make mistakes or make additions or leave things out or put things in? And then logically, to think through it, these are the people we would call scribes. This is their job. It's not an entry-level position. You have to be known for your handwriting, your legibility, your artistry, and being able to copy and make notes. And to do this again and again and again and again and again and again and over and over. The religious writings, this is your job. It's not an entry-level position. You go through, you're a proven person working on this. And a scribe is not exactly not an entry-level position. It's something that's taken very, very seriously. But even then, sometimes mistakes are made. In the Hebrew language, there are 2 letters, and I forgot I was going to put it up here, and I forgot. One letter is called a yid, the other is called a yah. Okay? A yid looks like an apostrophe. Yah looks like a long apostrophe. A little bit longer. You have one that's just a little hook right here. The other one goes hook down like that. And sometimes, and depending on the person, somebody's yid might be a little bit longer. Somebody's yah might be a little bit shorter. And, they can make mistakes like that. But those 2 letters don't really change the meaning, because guess what? You never read a word based on one letter. I love seeing the different reels and different tests that have the words all scrambled up there, but next thing you know, you're able to put it all together because your mind works that way. You just see the letters and you put the word together. And so you have instances like that. But the really doesn't part thing like that is that the reason we even know that happens is because every time a scribe would notice that, they'd make a note. They'd record it, like in the margin, saying this is different, and they would record that. And they did that for every little thing that they saw. And in copying the text, if there were variations, they would do that, and the variations would be slight, but still noted and recorded. And they did that for both Old and New Testaments, and we're going to get that into a second. And in the 1940s and the 1950s was just one of the neatest things. There was this great discovery, and some of you remember it or you've heard about it, a great discovery of preserved Old Testament scrolls that were found in the caves near the Dead Sea. The combination of how they were stored, where they were stored, they were preserved. Because it's like anything, just like human beings, things fall apart, things disintegrate over time, and then these things were actually preserved. And people thought that now we'll know, because the dates on them were about 300 BC, very far from 900 AD. So now we'll know. The secrets of the Old Testament will be revealed. But like any good Geraldo news report, what did it reveal? Nothing. Okay? It actually revealed nothing. All it revealed was, what they had in 900 AD was the same stuff. You can almost lay it right down on top of it, and it's the same material. It's the same words. It's the same. So it's reliable. The scrolls just simply matched up, and they found that what we actually have and what we translate from is accurate. And this is from before the time of Jesus, and these are the documents that Jesus would have been referring to when he stood up in the temple and did the scrolls, right, and read from them. So all these kinds of things is accurate. The scrolls matched up. And all the variations of, like I said, of the New Testament and the Old Testaments are recorded and noted. We'll throw another picture up. And this is, it's in my office. I was going to bring it out here, but I forgot it. We have both a Hebrew Old Testament and a Greek New Testament. And on the right is the Hebrew, and the left is the Greek. The Old Testament should be on the left. And the Old Testament in Hebrew, you read it from right to left instead of left to right, which is very confusing when you're studying it, but you get used to it. And notice there you have the text on the main part of the text, and in each one they call that, particularly in the New Testament, in the Greek New Testament, they've taken all the copies of everything they have, and they publish it, and they call it the majority text. The majority, meaning more than half. The majority of the copies say this. The same thing for the Masoretic text. The majority of the copies, they say this. What you may not realize when you're looking at it right now, it's hard to see, for those notes on the bottom, what do we call those? The footnotes. The variations are all listed there. So let's say the majority text says this, but copy 159 in Greek says this. Copy 347 in Latin says this. And they go through all the different variations, and they want you to see it. Nothing's hidden. That's what I love about it. It's begging to be examined. There's no secret cave in the Vatican where they're hiding things. It's laying it all out there. Here's everything, and it's open to everyone. This is a public document. It's public domain. And here it all is. So you can examine it, and then you think, well, okay, now in the variations, what do the variations say? Well, sometimes it says something different, but it's tiny little things that actually don't change anything. It's like you have the current of the Grand Rio. I'm going to make up some river name. I don't remember. Okay, the Amazon River. Okay, it's like the Amazon River is flowing, and it's flowing. It's going one way. You throw a pebble into it, it goes boop, and then it keeps going. That's what the variations are. It doesn't really stop it. It doesn't really do anything. So there's no mass discoveries that you'll find in there. So again, it has been a process. It wants to be examined. God wants you to know that you can trust it. We're given so many copies of it. So you can know that what you have is reliable from the Greek and the Hebrew New Testaments. But then you have to ask the question, We asked earlier, why are there so many translations? Okay, that's great. That's Greek and Hebrew, but how many of you know Greek and Hebrew? I put my hands down here. I know the software. I can read some things. I know how to look at it and look it up and those things. I had to train in it. That's why I have copies of it. But I'm not going to sit here today and read to you from it. But why are there so many translations? And some of the first ones that we had were actually from Martin Luther did that. He took the Greek and the Hebrew and actually presented then the German Bible. Put it in the language of people. It seems to be the most language that we have, the most translations are in English. So why are there so many translations? That's a question I've had before. And you look up the translation process to actually get published, because anybody can do it. But not because anybody can do it. Anybody can do it doesn't mean everybody. There's a phrase in there. Anybody can, but not everybody can. It's possible, but it takes scholars and a team of people to put these together, and there's a process. There is an academic and scientific process, and for each translation, there is a team of scholars that is using recognized and observable methods in translation. It's not done in a cave, not done in a vacuum, not done in some secret place. It's done with several people's hands in it to make sure you're holding each other accountable to the work that they're doing. And the source material is always the same. But again, why so many? Often that has to do with doing things like updating language. You have the King James Version and the New King James Version, because we don't speak with the these and the thous and that stuff anymore. So you update language. Sometimes it's a literary style, because in some translations people want the exact verses. I want to know word by word by word by word exactly what it says. But in English, remember it's written in Hebrew and Greek. In English, sometimes those sentences don't make a lot of sense. Like I said, it sounds like you're talking to Yoda sometimes, where you have to take all the words and put it all back together. Oh yeah, yesterday, may the 4th be with you. All right, so you have that. So you have to put all the letters together, and so they take it. Let's just take it and streamline it. And other people said, we want that. Other people said, no, we need to put it in a way people can understand or sort of reconstruct the sentence, but it's exactly the same intention of the verses, and that's also part of the academic version. We want to make sure we're preserving the intention. Other Bibles, I've got it in my office that are about the reading level of the audience, where they looked at the language being used, and it was like, holy cow, this is a very academic Bible. You have to be a very well-read person to have a great vocabulary to understand this. And then others have said, we want to take the same thing and put it down at a 5th grade reading level so that people can understand. And again, it's just about how you put it in. That's really why we have the different translations. And then some Bibles that people use are called paraphrases, which doesn't necessarily have all the same academic work to it, but the same concepts, and say we want to put it in a language-wise. You've got the Message, so you use that as a paraphrase. The New Living Translation, the Good News Bibles that were popular in the 70s are called paraphrases. And you say, well, how do I know if it's a paraphrase or not? Again, the beauty of the Bible and being investigated is that usually it says right on the very front of the cover, paraphrase. Or if you turn to the inside cover, paraphrase. And those intentions are just simply to help, as a teaching tool, to help people understand. Maybe put it in a different way. And sometimes in paraphrases, like the Message is really the work was done by one guy. And so while it may help to understand a passage, I'll never use it in an academic paper to prove a point. I'll go to the ESV and different translations for that kind of work. So it's just all there, and it's all open, and you can trust it. But then the question is okay, well, how do I read this? Because sometimes it is difficult. And we've talked about this definitely different times before. Like, how do we read it? And it doesn't really matter like how much you read in a day. I was told that the best thing to do is just take a little bit of time each day so you don't give yourself spiritual indigestion. Enough so you can process what's happening, ask questions, and look through those things. And there are some times where you'll go, I didn't get anything out of that, I don't understand that, but the important thing is to move on and to keep at it and to keep reading it. And it's important to know that. And it's also really important to know that the central figure in the whole book is not you. Sometimes we go, I want to find out my purpose and why. That's defined by the creator, the one who wrote it, and so you're looking to find out about him. And so how do you connect with God? And so in any of the stories, you get to see God's intent in creation. You get to see how he relates to his creation. You get to see how he relates to humans, how humans relate to humans. Notice when God is present, they're a light, but when God's not present, it's darkness. And how humans treat each other. You get to see all of that play out in God's people and God working in there. And again, it shows the good and it shows the bad. There's never just we're removing the bad stuff to make everything look good. And we're able to connect to God through the stories that are just straightforward. We are connected to God through the stories, through the teachings in there. The stories are often, like I said, just straightforward. And I think being straightforward means it's like bullet points in the details. And I actually really like that because it's not like a Harry Potter book, which gives you all the which creates the imagination for you, where the Bible leaves open for your imagination. So you can see yourself in the story. You can see yourself in a situation like David and Goliath. You can see yourself in a situation where God comes in and how you can apply it to what you're going through today. And we connect to God through the Bible. We connect to the Bible also, not just through the stories, but in the emotions that we see in the poetic books. People just pouring their hearts out to God and not always even getting an answer that they want. They pour out their anger, they pour out their love, they pour out a whole gamut of emotions. We see that in there. Something that we went to, part of our 8th grade trip that we do, our 7th and 8th grade trip, is when they go to Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C., and some of you have gone there for business. If you ever get a chance to do it, go see the Bible Museum. I remember going to the Bible Museum on the trip, and I thought it was going to be like a hokey Christian movie, where everything's going to be all glossy and love and just kind of really like praise the Lord land somewhere. I think it's in Texas. And I thought it was going to be like that, but you walk in and you're like, holy cow. The academic study that has gone into this place just to present the facts. And there's nothing at the end of it. At the end of the tour, you go through, you get to see the literary characters, you get to see the themes that run through the Bible, but you get to see how they do translations. You get to see copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You get to see how it's gone through the years. They've seen where they've made mistakes and where they've done good. It's revealed everything there. How it's influenced culture. How our laws, how it's influenced all of our culture. And you can spend at least a full day, if not more, there. But what I really loved about it, there was nothing at the end where somebody handed you a card and said, did you give your life to Jesus today? Because that wasn't the goal. The goal was to present the Bible and its influence and how it can be trusted, but it wasn't here you can trust the Bible, here's an argument for it. Here are the facts of it. It's beautiful. And if you're starting, or if you've been reading the Bible for a long time, if you're just starting, you're not sure maybe where to start, or you want to do something new, I recommend a reading plan. You can find a 30-day reading plan. You have to, like we always talk about the YouVersion Bible app, just because that's a great resource. But there's also a website that I've discovered through the YouVersion Bible app called BibleProject.com. And they've gone through these guys are academics who have gone through to explain the themes and overview of all the books of the Bible itself. They include an animated video, not a cartoon, but an animated video to help you to see. It's like picture like a professor in front of a whiteboard to see what they're talking about. And the video's like maybe 5 minutes long, and it helps you set up your thing. So I would encourage you really to help you understand these things, what's actually happening in the Bible itself, to look at it. And again, the central figure in the whole thing is God. And going back to Harry Potter books, okay, I like to read. I love to read, but I don't read very often, so that means I like to read. Okay, if I loved it, I'd read all the time, but reading books for fun, that's a series I've read 2-3 times because it's just fun. It's easy to read. And what I loved going through it was you read the whole series, and you get to the end, and you're like, what? Harry Potter? Imagine this, in all literature, the Christian themes that come up in most literature, what happens at the end, because I think it's one of the most moving stories of all time, and the why it hits us is that you have a guy who sacrifices his life for the good of the world, and then comes back from the dead. If you haven't read Harry Potter, it's been around for almost 30 years, so if I'm spoiler alert, I'm sorry. You should have read it by now. And that's what happens at the end of the book. But then what I like doing then is I thought, okay, that was fun. Then, maybe a year later, go back to it again. You start at the beginning, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, this all points to this moment. And you start doing all of the foreshadowing, and you start seeing stuff. And then it really makes sense. And it makes me feel like the guys on the road to Emmaus who are just walking about. They know the Bible, they've read it, and then there's Jesus saying, why are you shocked? All the foreshadowing is right there. This should have happened. And they're like, what? Oh man, I didn't see that before. And they're just walking along. I love it. They're walking along just talking about it. And they share that with their friends. And so if you feel alone in how you read the Bible, talk to friends, you look through it, you work through it together. But how God just opened it. Oh, so if something doesn't make sense to you, you just don't write it off and say, well, the Bible doesn't make sense. You ask somebody. I don't get this. And you work together, and it's just like God just does this. And that's why I'm looking around the room. I see people who read the Bible. People who've read it for a long time. Maybe you're just starting. But the reason why you read it over and over again is because more and more and more and more gets revealed every single time you pass through it. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And that you can trust this word that God has given us because he wants to be known. And he wants to be known.